Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating scientific investigation. We're looking at some groundbreaking research from Anthropic to figure out exactly how persuasive artificial intelligence has actually become. It's a topic that touches literally all of us, so today, we're just going to break down the data step by step. So here's the big question. Can an AI model change your mind? And I don't just mean giving you a list of facts, but actually shifting your fundamental stance on an issue. It's a pretty provocative premise, right? And to really answer it, we have to move past all the wild speculation and look at some rigorous empirical data. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. Can AI change minds? Public discourse versus data. Everywhere you look these days, there's this underlying societal anxiety about AI propaganda. We constantly hear these fears of AI becoming this sort of master manipulator, totally capable of mass influence. But, well, here's the problem. Until this research came out, we honestly hadn't known exactly how persuasive these language models really are. Basically, we've had a whole lot of fear, but very little hard data to back it up. So Anthropic recognized this massive gap and actually built a method to quantify it. Which brings us to Section 2, measuring persuasion, into the laboratory. So how do scientists actually measure something invisible like persuasion? Well, to get an accurate measurement, the researchers had to be incredibly careful about their testing ground. Think about it. If you ask people about deeply entrenched, highly polarized political issues, their minds are already made up, right? The data wouldn't show persuasion. It would really just show human stubbornness. So instead, they smartly selected 28 complex emerging topics, things where people's minds are actually still open to change. They drafted 56 opinionated claims around subjects like the ethics of space exploration or online content moderation. And that gave them a totally clean slate to test true persuasion. Once they had those topics locked in, the methodology itself was elegantly simple. Participants went through a quick 3-step process. First, they rated their initial agreement with a claim on a scale of 1 to 7. Next, they read a 250-word argument that was specifically designed to persuade them. And finally, they were asked to re-rate their agreement. The difference between that first number and the last number? Boom! That is our mathematical measure of persuasion. But of course, an AI needs a challenger. And that is where this massive number comes in, 3,832. That's the number of human participants who were actually paid to write the absolute best 250-word persuasive arguments they could possibly muster. And to make absolutely sure these humans were giving it their all to establish a solid baseline, they were financially motivated. They were competing for a $100 bonus for the most persuasive essay. So the stage is totally set. We've got highly motivated humans on one side and language models on the other. Let's get to the fun part. Section 3, AI versus humans, the results. And this brilliantly illustrates the completely different tactical approaches taken by human writers versus AI models. For instance, let's look at arguments about regulating emotional AI companions. The human argument zeroes right in on the individual. We're talking psychological effects, hormones, personal attachment. But the Claude Opus argument, it takes a much more macro view. It argues based on massive societal implications, social withdrawal, and broad dependence. The crazy thing is, these two specific arguments were rated as equally persuasive, but they got there through entirely different rhetorical strategies. Now, let's move along and see how this builds across different generations of AI. As we track the progress from Claude 1.3 up to Claude 2, and finally to the frontier model, Claude 3 Opus, the degree of persuasiveness climbs dramatically. It's right there in the data. Each successive generation of the model becomes measurably more effective at actually changing human minds. The models are getting larger, they're getting more capable, and for sure, they are getting far more convincing. Which leads us directly to this absolutely crucial, undeniable finding. Claude 3 Opus produces arguments that do not statistically differ in persuasiveness from those written by humans. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The newest frontier model has essentially hit the human baseline for changing minds. The AI is now literally just as persuasive as human writers who were actively trying to win a cash prize. Oh, and as a quick sanity check, the researchers did include a clever little control. They actually asked the AI to try and persuade people that the freezing point of water is not 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And as you'd expect, and honestly, thankfully, 0 minds were changed. This proved that the methodology actually worked. It showed participants were genuinely reading and evaluating the arguments, not just randomly clicking numbers to rush through the test. All right, moving on to Section 4, Prompt Matters, AI's Distinct Voices. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how the researchers didn't just tell the AI to, write an argument. They actually gave it very specific personas to test how the prompt changes the effectiveness. They tested a compelling case prompt aimed at skeptics, a role-playing expert relying on ethos and pathos, a strict logical reasoning prompt, and finally a deceptive prompt. And that last one literally gave the AI permission to just completely make up facts, statistics, and credible sources. And here is the surprising and honestly kind of unsettling twist. The deceptive prompt was the most persuasive overall. Basically, when the model was allowed to hallucinate perfectly tailored, totally fake statistics and cite completely fabricated credible sources, human readers were highly persuaded by it. It's a huge red flag. It highlights this critical danger regarding misinformation. People very often do not verify the correctness of the facts presented to them if they're wrapped up in a really well-written argument. Section 5. Limits of testing. Lab versus real life. So keep in mind, we are looking at a controlled lab experiment. In scientific research, there's this concept called ecological validity. It basically just means, do these findings actually reflect real-world, everyday life dynamics? Because let's be real, out in the real world, our viewpoints are shaped by our lived experiences, our social circles, our trusted friends. They are very rarely shaped solely by an isolated 250-word text just popping up on a blank screen. Breaking down these lab versus life differences reveals a few absolutely crucial limitations. First off, this study only tested single-turn arguments, kind of like just reading a single blog post. Real life is usually a multi-turn debate, right? A lot of back and forth. Second, the human writers in the study were motivated by cash, sure, but they weren't professional persuasion experts or seasoned psychologists. And finally, the study didn't test what might happen if a human and an AI collaborated to write an argument together. You have to imagine an interactive, back-and-forth debate on social media might yield very different persuasion scores than this one isolated test. Furthermore, the study likely bumped into something called the anchoring effect. This is a cognitive bias where people tend to stick pretty closely to their initial stance. In this experiment, the vast majority of people only shifted their opinion by 0 or 1 point. Because they had already committed to a specific number on that 1 to 7 scale right at the start, they were psychologically anchored to it, which kind of limits the overall magnitude of the persuasion the researchers could observe. All right, bringing it all home with Section 6, Ethics and Safeguards Preventing Misuse. The capacity for AI persuasion presents unacceptably dangerous risks for disinformation campaigns and political manipulation out in the real world. So we're faced with a pretty major ethical dilemma. Testing these risks in the wild, like, say, running a fake political campaign just to see if the AI can actually sway an election, is fundamentally unethical. No way we can do that. And yet, thoroughly understanding these risks in a controlled manner is an absolute necessity for public safety. To help mitigate these risks, Anthropic enforces a very strict acceptable use policy. It explicitly prohibits using their models for abusive or fraudulent applications or for generating deceptive and misleading content. And notably, it outright bans political campaigning and lobbying. They actually utilize a mix of both automated systems and manual enforcement to make sure their models aren't being misused in high-risk, real-world scenarios, like elections, for example. So the crucial point is that the researchers ultimately came to this conclusion. Persuasion isn't inherently evil. It's a general skill we use in marketing, in healthcare, and just in everyday life. But as an AI capability, it is inevitably tied to certain kinds of misuse, like the rapid automated generation of highly convincing disinformation. The exact same skill that makes an AI a fantastic writing assistant is what makes it such a potent tool for influence. Which leaves us with this final, thought-provoking question to consider. We've seen the data. The scaling trend is super clear. As AI models continue to scale in persuasiveness, becoming virtually indistinguishable from human experts, how will we separate human truth from synthetic influence in our daily lives? It's a massive question we all need to be asking ourselves as we navigate this whole new technological reality. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the information around you.